The fog was so thick that soldiers could barely see 20 feet ahead. Perfect weather for what was about to happen. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, the largest German offensive on the Western Front since 1940 erupted across an 80-mile stretch of the Ardennes forest. Over 200,000 German troops, supported by 1,000 tanks and assault guns, smashed into thinly held American lines. This was Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied armies, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force the Western Allies to negotiate peace. Leading the assault was Germany's most elite and feared formation, the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. These were not ordinary soldiers. The Leibstandarte had been Hitler's personal bodyguard unit before the war and had evolved into one of the Wehrmacht's premier armored divisions. They had fought on every front: Poland, France, the Balkans, Russia. They were veterans of Kursk, masters of armored warfare, fanatical in their dedication to Hitler and the Nazi cause. Their commander, SS Brigadeführer Wilhelm Mohnke, was a ruthless officer with a reputation for both tactical brilliance and war crimes. His division was equipped with the best Germany could provide: King Tiger tanks, Panther tanks, assault guns, and experienced panzer grenadiers. American forces in the Ardennes were caught completely by surprise. Intelligence had dismissed the possibility of a major German offensive. The Germans were beaten, everyone said. They lacked the fuel, the men, the equipment for anything serious. Everyone was wrong. As German artillery thundered and panzers rolled forward through the fog, American units were overrun, encircled, or forced into desperate retreats. But 60 miles to the south, General George S. Patton's Third Army was about to receive the call that would lead to one of the most dramatic confrontations of the war. When news of the German offensive reached Supreme Allied headquarters on December 16, panic spread among some staff officers. The Germans had achieved complete surprise and were advancing rapidly. American units were in disarray. The situation looked catastrophic. General Eisenhower called an emergency meeting of his top commanders at Verdun on December 19. The mood was grim. Then Patton walked in. While others saw disaster, Patton saw opportunity. "Hell, let's have the guts to let the bastards go all the way to Paris," he said. "Then we'll really cut 'em off and chew 'em up." Eisenhower was not amused. He needed Patton to stop the German advance, not give them more rope. The critical point was Bastogne, a road junction town where 7 major roads converged. If the Germans captured Bastogne, they could continue their drive west. If Bastogne held, the German advance would be bottlenecked and vulnerable to counterattack. The 101st Airborne Division was rushing to defend Bastogne, but they needed help. Eisenhower turned to Patton. "George, I want you to disengage from your current operations, turn your entire army 90 degrees north, and attack the German flank to relieve Bastogne." What Eisenhower was asking was nearly impossible. Patton's Third Army was currently engaged in offensive operations on a completely different front. Turning an entire army, hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, 90 degrees in the middle of winter and launching a coordinated attack would normally take weeks of planning. Patton checked his watch and said, "We'll be there in 48 hours. The room went silent. Eisenhower thought Patton was joking or grandstanding. But Patton was dead serious. He had already anticipated this request and had his staff prepare 3 different contingency plans for exactly this scenario. Within hours, the Third Army began its extraordinary pivot north. Leading the way was one of Patton's most elite formations, the 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General Hugh Gaffey. If the 1st SS Leibstandarte was Germany's elite, the U.S. 4th Armored Division was America's answer. Activated in 1941, the 4th Armored had fought across France with distinction, earning a reputation as one of the most aggressive and effective armored divisions in the U.S. Army. Under Patton's Third Army, they had spearheaded the breakout from Normandy and the race across France. The division was built around speed and violence of action: hit hard, hit fast, and never stop moving. Their tanks were primarily M4 Shermans, supported by M5 Stuart light tanks for reconnaissance and M18 Hellcat tank destroyers for anti-armor work. They weren't as heavily armored as German Panthers or Tigers, but American crews had learned to fight smart, use superior numbers, better mobility, excellent communication, and combined arms tactics. The 4th Armored was commanded by officers who understood Patton's philosophy: a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. They trained constantly, maintained their equipment obsessively, and pushed their men hard. The division had 3 main combat commands, CCA, CCB, and CCR, each capable of independent operations. As the 4th Armored Division turned north toward Bastogne on December 20, they knew they were heading into the largest battle they'd ever fought. Intelligence reported that German forces, including SS Panzer divisions, were converging on Bastogne from multiple directions. The race was on: could the 4th Armored break through German lines and reach Bastogne before the 101st Airborne was overrun? And what would happen when Patton's elite tankers met the 1st SS Leibstandarte in head-to-head combat? The answer would be written in fire and steel over the next 2 weeks. The 4th Armored Division's advance toward Bastogne wasn't a simple drive up a highway. German forces blocked every approach, and the weather was miserable: snow, ice, and fog that grounded Allied air support. On December 22, Combat Command A of the 4th Armored, led by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, made contact with German forces near the village of Chaumont, about 15 miles south of Bastogne. What they encountered was a well-prepared defensive position held by elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division. The Leibstandarte had been ordered to block American relief efforts while other German units tightened the noose around Bastogne. The SS troops had positioned themselves in wooded terrain with excellent fields of fire, supported by anti-tank guns and dug-in Panthers. The initial American probing attacks were met with devastating fire. Sherman tanks attempting to advance down the main road were knocked out by concealed anti-tank guns. The Germans had every approach covered and were fighting from prepared positions, a defender's dream. Abrams, commanding the lead task force, quickly recognized that frontal assault would be suicide. Instead, he ordered his units to probe for weaknesses, using artillery and tank destroyers to suppress enemy positions while reconnaissance elements searched for flanking routes. The fighting on December 22 was vicious but inconclusive. American forces couldn't break through, but they'd identified the German positions and were developing a plan. That night, Abrams met with his staff to plan the next day's attack. His intelligence officer reported troubling news: prisoners captured that day were from the 1st SS Panzer Division. These weren't second-rate Volksgrenadier units or exhausted rear echelon troops. These were elite SS Panzergrenadiers and tankers, some of the best Germany had. "Good," Abrams said grimly. "When we beat them, everyone will know we beat the best they had." The real battle was about to begin. The 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte defending south of Bastogne was not the same unstoppable force that had crushed Soviet armies in 1943. By December 1944, even elite units were shadows of their former strength. The division had suffered heavy casualties in Normandy and the retreat across France. Equipment losses had been severe. Replacements were increasingly young, barely trained soldiers mixed with combat-hardened veterans. Fuel was critically short. German tanks often sat immobile, used as static pillboxes because there wasn't enough gasoline to move them. But what the Leibstandarte lacked in numbers and supplies, they made up for in determination. These were true believers, men who had sworn personal oaths to Hitler, who wore the SS runes with pride, who genuinely believed in Nazi ideology. They weren't fighting just to defend Germany. They were fighting for their Führer, for their twisted vision of racial supremacy, for a cause they knew was probably lost but couldn't abandon. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Paper, commanding one of the Leibstandarte's battle groups, exemplified this mentality. He had already gained infamy for the Malmedy massacre just days earlier, where his troops had murdered 84 American POWs in cold blood. Paper was a brilliant tactical commander and a war criminal. The combination made him exceptionally dangerous. The SS defensive strategy was simple but effective: used the limited King Tigers and Panthers as mobile reserves while Panzer Grenadiers held fortified positions. Force the Americans to attack across open ground into prepared kill zones. Make them pay for every yard in blood. And it was working. American attacks on December 22 and 23 made minimal progress. The 4th Armored was being bled while the clock ticked down for Bastogne defenders. Something had to change. On the night of December 23 to 24, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams made a decision that epitomized the difference between American and German tactical doctrine. While the Germans expected methodical, predictable attacks during daylight, Abrams ordered a night assault, something American armor rarely attempted due to the coordination difficulties. The attack plan was daring. A company of M4 Sherman tanks, supported by armored infantry in half-tracks, would attack through a narrow forest trail that reconnaissance had identified. The trail was barely wide enough for tanks and completely unsuitable for armored operations, which was exactly why the Germans hadn't fortified it heavily. At 0200 hours on December 24, Christmas Eve, the attack began. American tanks advanced with infantry riding on top, moving slowly through the forest in near total darkness. Navigation was by compass and sheer nerve. The lead tank was commanded by Captain William Dwight, who navigated by having infantry scouts walk ahead and guide him. The column moved in eerie silence, engines throttled back, no radio communication, just the crunch of treads on snow. Then they were through the forest and behind German lines. What followed was chaos. American tanks appeared in the rear of SS positions at first light. Panzer Grenadiers scrambled to turn their weapons around. A King Tiger, positioned to fire west toward expected American attacks, was hit from behind by multiple Shermans. Its heavy frontal armor was useless when the attack came from the rear. The SS position began to collapse. German units, realizing they were being surrounded, attempted to fall back but ran into more American forces attacking from the front. The carefully prepared defensive line was shattered. By noon on December 24, the 4th Armored had broken through the 1st SS defensive belt. They were 5 miles closer to Bastogne. But between them and the surrounded paratroopers lay more SS units, and the weather was finally clearing, which meant German tanks could move again. The 1st SS Leibstandarte wasn't going to simply yield ground without striking back. On the afternoon of December 24, with improving weather allowing better visibility, SS Obersturmbannführer Paper organized a counterattack using his remaining mobile armor, a battle group of Panthers and King Tiger supported by Panzer Grenadiers. The counterattack hit the 4th Armored's forward positions at dusk, when American units were consolidating their gains from the morning breakthrough. The Germans had the advantage of surprise and superior tanks. The King Tiger was nearly invulnerable frontally to American tank guns, only hits on the sides or rear could penetrate its massive armor. The first American tanks knew of the counterattack was when a Sherman exploded, hit by an 88mm round from a King Tiger firing from concealment 1,200 yards away. Then another Sherman died. And another. The American tankers were fighting at a terrible disadvantage. Their 75mm guns could barely scratch King Tigers frontally, and the Germans were engaging from beyond effective American range. The battle became a desperate fight for survival. American tank destroyers, the M18 Hellcats with their excellent mobility and powerful 76mm guns, rushed forward to engage the German heavies. The Hellcats couldn't slug it out with King Tigers, but they could use their speed to flank and hit from angles where they could penetrate. Meanwhile, American artillery, always a strength, began dropping concentrated fire on German positions. Forward observers called in devastating barrages that forced German tanks to button up and infantry to take cover. The battle raged for 3 hours as darkness fell. When it ended, both sides had taken losses. The Americans had lost 14 tanks destroyed. The Germans had lost 3 Panthers and a King Tiger, fewer vehicles, but proportionally more devastating because German losses couldn't be replaced. Most critically, the 4th Armored still held the ground they'd gained. The SS counterattack had slowed but not stopped the American advance. December 25, 1944. Christmas Day. Across Europe, soldiers on both sides thought about home, about peace, about anything except the war they were fighting. But in the snow-covered hills south of Bastogne, there was no Christmas truce, no moment of shared humanity. There was only killing. The 4th Armored Division renewed their attack at dawn. They were now just 3 miles from Bastogne's perimeter, but those 3 miles were defended by the most fanatical SS troops, men who would rather die than retreat. The fighting on Christmas Day was the most intense yet. Villages became battlefields as American infantry fought house to house against SS Panzer Grenadiers. A particularly brutal fight erupted in the village of Ardennes, where German defenders had fortified every building. American tanks couldn't advance without infantry support because German Panzerfaust teams, soldiers with shoulder-fired anti-tank rockets, lurked in every doorway and cellar. The standard Sherman tank was vulnerable to these weapons, especially at close range. The solution came from an unlikely source, M4 Sherman tanks equipped with dozer blades designed for clearing obstacles. American tankers began simply driving through buildings, collapsing them on defending Germans. It was brutal, effective, and terrifying. As buildings collapsed in clouds of dust and snow, SS troops who survived the collapses emerged to surrender or fight on. By afternoon, Ardennes was in American hands, but at a heavy cost. An entire infantry company had been reduced to 40 effective soldiers. Tank losses were mounting. And ahead, the final mile to Bastogne was defended by more SS units. At 4:45 p.m. on December 26, 1944, the lead tanks of the 4th Armored Division's 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Charles Bulge, broke through the German encirclement and made contact with the 101st Airborne Division's defensive perimeter at Bastogne. The siege was broken. The link-up moment was almost anticlimactic. Bulge's Sherman tank approached a foxhole where a paratrooper sat, and Bulge called out, "Come here. This is the 4th Armored." The paratrooper, suspicious, asked, "How do we know you're not Germans?" Bulge, exhausted and in no mood for debate, shouted back, "I'm an American, God damn it. Don't you see the star on this tank?" The paratrooper grinned and said, "Well, I'll be damned. You guys made it." But breaking the siege didn't end the battle. Bastogne was relieved but not secure. German forces still surrounded the salient on 3 sides, and the corridor the 4th Armored had carved was narrow and vulnerable. The 1st SS Leibstandarte, despite being pushed back, was far from defeated. They immediately began planning attacks to cut the corridor and re-isolate Bastogne. Over the next week, some of the fiercest fighting of the entire Battle of the Bulge occurred as German forces attempted to cut the relief corridor while American forces tried to widen it. The 4th Armored and 1st SS would clash repeatedly in savage engagements where quarter was neither asked nor given. The weather remained miserable. Soldiers on both sides fought in sub-zero temperatures, suffering from frostbite, trench foot, and exposure as much as from enemy action. Wounded men froze to death before they could be evacuated. Tank crews fought in vehicles where touching metal with bare skin meant instant frostbite. But the Americans had one decisive advantage: they could replace losses in men and equipment. The Germans could not. Every tank destroyed was gone forever. Every veteran killed was replaced by an untrained boy. The mathematics of attrition were inexorable. As January 1945 began, the 1st SS Leibstandarte was a spent force. The division that had entered the Ardennes offensive with approximately 22,000 men now counted fewer than 12,000 effectives. Tank strength had been reduced from 89 to fewer than 30 operational vehicles. Fuel shortages meant that even operational tanks often couldn't move. But the SS didn't surrender. They didn't retreat to prepared positions. They fought on with a desperation born of fanaticism and the knowledge that defeat meant the end of everything they'd fought for. In early January, SS Brigade Führer Monk ordered a final attack against the Bastogne salient, a desperate attempt to prove that the Leibstandarte was still a fighting force. The attack was doomed from the start. American forces now dominated the battlefield. Allied air superiority was total. Every movement of German armor was spotted and attacked from the air. Artillery concentrations could be called down within minutes. American tank numbers were overwhelming. The SS attack of January 3 to 4 achieved some initial success, penetrating American lines in several places. But each penetration was quickly contained and eliminated. German tanks that broke through ran out of fuel and were abandoned. SS Panzer grenadiers who advanced into American positions were cut off and forced to surrender or fight to the death. Most chose the latter. One incident captured the nature of this final phase of fighting. An isolated company of SS Panzer grenadiers, surrounded and out of ammunition, refused American calls to surrender. When American forces overran the position, they found 47 dead SS soldiers and not a single prisoner. The SS had fought literally to the last bullet. By January 10, Hitler finally authorized withdrawal. The Ardennes offensive, Operation Wacht am Rhein, had failed completely. The first SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler was pulled from the line and sent east to face the massive Soviet offensive that had just begun in Poland. When the Battle of the Bulge officially ended on January 25, 1945, the costs were staggering. The U.S. Army suffered approximately 80,000 casualties, the largest American battle of World War II. German losses were even higher, roughly 100,000 casualties plus 800 tanks and assault guns destroyed. The 4th Armored Division that had spearheaded Patton's relief of Bastogne had suffered approximately 1,400 casualties and lost 150 armored vehicles during the month-long battle. But they had accomplished their mission and earned their place in military history. The 1st SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler suffered over 10,000 casualties and was essentially destroyed as an effective fighting force. The division would be rebuilt one final time and sent to Hungary, where it would surrender to American forces in May 1945. Many of its officers and men would face war crimes trials for atrocities committed during the war. What had the confrontation between these two elite forces proven? Several things emerged from the bitter fighting south of Bastogne. First, training and leadership matter more than equipment. Despite facing superior German tanks, American forces had prevailed through better tactics, superior combined arms coordination, and more flexible command structures. Second, logistics determine outcomes. American forces could replace losses in men and material. German forces could not. The mathematics of attrition made German defeat inevitable once the initial surprise was overcome. Third, air power was decisive. Once the weather cleared and Allied aircraft could operate, German forces were at an overwhelming disadvantage. Every movement was spotted, every concentration was bombed. Fourth, fanaticism is not a substitute for strategic wisdom. The SS fought with incredible determination and tactical skill, but they were fighting for a lost cause. Their bravery couldn't change the strategic reality that Germany was defeated. The battle also demonstrated Patton's genius for mobile warfare. His ability to disengage, pivot an entire army 90 degrees, and launch a coordinated offensive in 48 hours remains one of the most impressive operational achievements of the war. Behind the strategic narrative and tactical analyses were individual human beings who fought, suffered, and died in the frozen forests around Bastogne. Lieutenant Charles Bogus, who led the breakthrough to Bastogne, survived the war but was haunted by the memories of soldiers he'd lost. In post-war interviews, he rarely discussed his role in the relief of Bastogne, preferring to remember the men who didn't make it home. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Paper, whose battle group committed the Malmedy massacre, escaped capture during the battle but was eventually tried for war crimes. He was sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment, and eventually released in 1956. He lived in France under a false name until he was assassinated in 1976, likely by French resistance veterans who discovered his identity. Captain William Dwight, who led the night attack that broke the SS defensive line, was killed on January 4, 1945, during the final SS counterattacks. He was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Creighton Abrams, the aggressive tank commander who led Combat Command A, would go on to become a 4-star general and Army Chief of Staff during the Vietnam War. The M1 Abrams tank is named in his honor, a fitting tribute to a man who understood armored warfare intuitively. Thousands of ordinary soldiers on both sides left no records beyond their names on casualty lists. An 18-year-old replacement in the 4th Armored who arrived on December 20 and died on December 23. An SS Panzer Grenadier who fought at Normandy, across France, and finally fell in the snow south of Bastogne, never knowing his homeland was weeks from collapse. A medic who saved a dozen lives before being killed by artillery. These individual stories, of courage, of sacrifice, of waste, are the real history of the battle, the confrontation between the 1st SS Leibstandarte and the 4th Armored Division south of Bastogne became a case study in military academies for decades afterward. Several key lessons emerged: combined arms integration, the Americans effectively coordinated tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support. No arm operated independently. This integration multiplied combat effectiveness. The Germans, by contrast, often fought with arms in isolation, tanks without infantry support, infantry without adequate artillery. Flexibility versus rigidity. American commanders at battalion and company level were empowered to make tactical decisions and adjust to battlefield conditions. German commanders often waited for orders from higher headquarters, losing precious time. Initiative and speed. Patton's doctrine of rapid movement, aggressive action, and accepting calculated risks proved superior to more methodical approaches. The 4th Armored advanced despite obstacles, while German forces often paused to consolidate or wait for perfect conditions. Logistics matter. American forces had abundant fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. German forces fought under constant shortages that limited their tactical options. Air superiority changes everything. Once weather cleared, Allied control of the air was devastating to German operations. Modern warfare cannot be fought effectively without air superiority or at least air parity. Training for replacements. American replacement training, while not perfect, produced soldiers who could function in combat. German replacement training by late 1944 was minimal, producing soldiers who were liabilities rather than assets. Defensive positions. The SS defensive tactics, using terrain, preparing positions, creating kill zones, were excellent. But static defense cannot win wars. Eventually, the attacker finds a way through. Morale and motivation. American forces fought for concrete objectives: relieve Bastogne, defeat Germany, go home. SS forces fought for ideology and personal loyalty to Hitler. When the strategic situation became hopeless, ideological motivation wasn't enough. Any discussion of the 1st SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler must confront an uncomfortable truth: they were an elite military formation in service of an evil cause. The SS wasn't just another military unit. It was the armed wing of the Nazi Party, sworn to personal loyalty to Hitler, and deeply involved in the Holocaust and other war crimes. The Leibstandarte's record included military excellence and war crimes. They had fought brilliantly on multiple fronts, but they had also committed atrocities. The Malmedy massacre during the Bulge was just one example. Earlier in the war, Leibstandarte units had murdered POWs in France, Greece, and the Soviet Union. After the war, many Leibstandarte officers faced war crimes trials. Some were executed, others imprisoned, some escaped justice entirely. The division's legacy is complicated and controversial. German military historians and former Wehrmacht officers often tried to draw distinctions between clean Wehrmacht units and criminal SS units. This distinction has been thoroughly debunked by modern historians. Both committed war crimes, and both were complicit in Nazi Germany's crimes. But the SS was particularly devoted to Nazi ideology and more likely to commit atrocities. For American veterans who fought them, the SS represented Nazi Germany at its most fanatical and dangerous. They were skilled soldiers fighting for an evil cause, a combination that made them particularly deadly. The 4th Armored Division veterans who defeated the Leibstandarte south of Bastogne took pride in that victory precisely because they knew they had beaten Germany's best. Modern military professionals study the tactical and operational lessons of these battles while being careful to separate military professionalism from the evil cause the Wehrmacht and SS served. The SS were skilled soldiers, but they were skilled soldiers fighting for genocide, racial supremacy, and totalitarianism. That context can never be forgotten. The battle between the 1st SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler and the U.S. 4th Armored Division south of Bastogne in December 1944 to January 1945 stands as one of the decisive small unit actions of World War II. It demonstrated several enduring truths about warfare. First, elite status is earned in combat, not conferred by designation. Both the SS and the 4th Armored were considered elite by their respective armies. The difference was that American elite status was based on training, performance, and results. German SS elite status was based partly on ideological commitment and political reliability. Combat performance ultimately matters more than political purity. Second, tactics matter, but strategy determines outcomes. The SS fought with skill and determination, but they were fighting for a strategic objective, splitting the Allied armies, that was unrealistic from the start. Tactical excellence cannot overcome strategic impossibility. Third, the moral dimension of warfare cannot be ignored. The 4th Armored fought for the liberation of Europe and the defeat of fascism. The SS fought for Hitler's racial empire and genocidal ideology. The Americans could draw on reserves of motivation that came from fighting for a just cause. The SS motivation was based on indoctrination that couldn't survive the reality of impending defeat. Fourth, modern warfare requires industrial capacity. Germany's inability to replace losses in men and equipment meant that even their best units were fighting a losing battle. America's industrial might meant losses could be replaced and strength could be continuously reinforced. Today, the 4th Armored Division's colors are carried by the 1st Armored Division. The 1st SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler no longer exists, disbanded in defeat, its legacy forever stained by the crimes it committed in service of evil. When elite forces meet in battle, victory goes not to the most fanatical or the best equipped, but to those fighting for the right cause with the right combination of training, leadership, equipment, and national will. In December 1944, that was Patton's 3rd Army and the 4th Armored Division. The snow-covered hills south of Bastogne were where Hitler's last gamble died, defeated by American armor, American determination, and American belief in a cause worth fighting for.